Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special board meeting number 2 for the water rate study, public and special board meeting, our workshop. This is the second workshop we've had. The first one was on February 11th. Then we have the one tonight, and then we have the regular board meeting next Tuesday, March 3rd, in which the board will vote to accept or not the consultancy water rate study, which we're going to review tonight. So I'll move on to welcome everyone for coming, and I'll move on to the first agenda item, which is open time. So if anyone in the audience has any issues they'd like to bring up before the board, not on the agenda tonight, and the agenda item tonight is the water rate study, please feel free to comment right now. Okay. Having said that, I'll close open time, and we'll move on to agenda item number 2, which is the Nevada and Recycled Water Rate Study Workshop number 2. And to make the presentation and introduce the people who will present, I'd like to introduce Drew McIntyre, who's the General Manager of North Marin Water District. Drew?
Okay, thank you. As President Jolly indicated, this is our second workshop, and what we're trying to do with these workshops is get as much information out to our customers so that they can better assess what the proposed rate structure will be and revenue increase. And again, after workshop number 2, then this item will again come to the board as a regular, the next regular meeting, which is March 3rd. And at that time, the board will be considered accepting the rate study and then giving direction to staff on moving forward with Prop 218 notification to our customers. I want to provide some history again, similar to what was done with workshop number 1, just to remind the board and the public that back about a year ago in March 2019, the board approved an agreement with Hildebrand Consulting to prepare a comprehensive water rate study. And the objective of the water rate study is to develop water rates that are fair and equitable, and to ensure that the district's water rates comply with what is commonly referred to as Proposition 218. Essentially, that proposition mandates that the rate structure generates revenue from each class of customers in proportion to the cost to serve each customer. So workshop number 1 was held 2 weeks ago. At that point in time, we had 6 customers attend, and we had 1 public comment in support of the clarity of the rate study presentation that was provided by Mark Hildebrand and the rationale for the proposed changes. We also had a couple other comments related to the need to ensure that there was messaging out to our customers on the changes in the water rates structures, because the tier rates in particular, because there are some significant changes in there. And then there were some other questions raised on the rate structure methodology, and staff has already been talking with Mark Hildebrand, and those during his presentation tonight at the appropriate location, he'll come back to some of those comments that were raised at workshop number 1. Some of the things that's important to note is, since workshop number 1, we have put the video on our website. I want to thank again Nevada Television and Gino out here for doing a really good job, and other supporting members there on having that video available, and that's really beneficial for the customers that haven't had a chance to come to the workshop. They can view the workshop from home and hopefully get questions answered themselves, and if not, they can follow up with any questions with district staff. Some of the comments that we've received since that last workshop have been summarized in the memo here. The 2 customers expressed opposition to the rate increase via an email. One customer came into the office inquiring about what tier they would fall under in the new rate structure. And one email was from a customer asking how much their water bill would be with the proposed increases. Again, what we're trying to do with the multitude of changes that are being made here is direct folks to our cost calculator that's on our website. It essentially is customized for each individual user, where you can put in your own account information and then it'll calculate out what the impact is on your water bill. So we continue to encourage folks to utilize that for additional information on how it impacts them individually. So Mark Hildebrand will give a presentation similar to the one in workshop number 1. We do have Will Houston here that hasn't had the benefit of the original presentation, as well as Director Pettery. And so in Mark's presentation, he'll again lead the discussion, including the rate setting process, the rate study framework, the enterprise fund revenue and expenses, financial forecast, and rate structure redesign. And a couple other things that I'd like to mention before turning it over to Mark again is to thank Carl Nelson from our legal counsel for attending tonight. He will also be in attendance at our meeting a week from today. I would also like to again just review the outreach efforts that we've undertaken to date. Again, remind the board back in November of 2019, we included a notice in our fall water line about this water rate study process. It was mailed to all of our customers in our Novato service area. We also posted this information on our website back in November. In December through January, we added a message on all of our water bills about this process, including these dates. Again, that we're following here as part of the rate study and board action. We've had 2 articles in the Marin IJ. Thank you, Will. We appreciate that. The most recent one was actually a front page article, so that's really good to help get the news out to our customers. We also ran an ad in February in the Marin IJ. In February we did an e-blast to over 8,000 of our customers that we have emails for. That's over well over 1/3 of our customers, and we had indication that we had about 3,300 hits on those emails, so people were clicking on that and opening up the link to our website, so that was really good customer penetration on that. And I want to point out that one of the things I think that North Marin Water District prides itself on is, again, are our rates fair and equitable. I want to remind the board that our rates are, even with these proposed changes, would be the lowest in Marin County, and that's both in the East Marin and West Marin water service providers, and we would still be right at the median of our 16 Bay Area comparison agencies that we commonly compare ourselves to. It's important to talk about what have we done to control costs. As I mentioned at the last meeting, over the last decade, we've reduced our staffing from 58 full-time equivalent to 54. We've done that while we have expanded our recycled water system significantly and added 17 miles of pipe, 2 tanks. Went from 2 recycled water customers to 90 recycled water customers, and we've done all that with our existing staff without expanding staff. On the financing and grant side, we've been very successful in getting over $10 million in grants for our recycled water expansion from state and federal agencies. And we've also been successful in obtaining very low interest rates from the state. Some of our loans as low as 1% financing over 25 to 30-year period. So that's helped control those, have much lower financing costs compared to the regular market trend. And a common question is, what are we doing about pension costs? I want to again remind the board that in looking at the 2017 grand jury report and comparing North Marin against other agencies in Marin, that we were 39% below the average of all other public agencies in pension costs and 20% below the average of special utility districts. And then in closing, I just want to remind the board and the public that the district maintains almost $140 million of infrastructure and systems made up of pipes, pump stations, reservoirs, treatment plants, and over 27 fire hydrants. And some of these systems are over 70 years old. And you can see with the justification that we're going through the rate study, that it's really imperative that the district increase its reinvestment in order to ensure consistent and continued safe and reliable operation in a cost-effective manner. And so if there aren't any questions from the board, I'd like to ask Mark to come up and provide his presentation. Mark, the last presentation you gave was around 30 to 40 minutes and going through the slides, and I'll leave it up to you a little bit in your subjective analysis there and going through it as far as the highlights to cover again as we go through it.
Understood. I agree. Okay, let's see if we can.
Did you want to hold questions till the end of the presentation?
Yeah, I think it would be good just for the flow of information, given the complexity of the topic, to go ahead and let Mark go through the presentation, and that'll be good even for the video, and then we can come back to any areas of the presentation for questions and answers.
Well, thank you for having me again to give this presentation. As Drew mentioned, this is largely the same presentation that was given previously. So there are a few slides in here that I think we can cover pretty quickly, and others that I would like to continue to detail, because I think it is the crux of what's being proposed, and important for those in the audience, new folks in the audience, to be able to absorb all that information. So as we go through this study, I'll first cover what the rate study scope was, the purpose of the rate study, and the areas that we were planning to cover from the beginning. And then I'll review the financial plans for both the potable water system, which we're calling the Novato Enterprise, and the recycled water enterprise. And then we'll cover the proposed rate designs and structural changes that are being proposed, and wrap up with the schedule. So in the rate setting world for water utilities, there's three major steps that are very common that you'll find amongst all rate studies. It starts with a revenue requirements, which is really a financial plan. It's looking at the utility as a whole and understanding all of the revenues that are coming in, all the expenses that are going out, and coming up with a financial plan that will allow you to continue to manage the utility in a responsible way by minimizing rate increases. Once you understand how much rate revenue is required through the financial plan, you move on to the cost of service, which is really the crux of Proposition 218. It's identifying the cost to serve your various customer types. In this case, it would be residential customers, commercial customers, recycled water customers, and understanding how they use the system and allocating costs to those customers based on how they use the system. And finally, the rate design portion is, once you understand how your customers are driving costs, you then design the rates in a way that will recover those costs, and you can make some decisions about whether you want to recover those costs through fixed revenue, through variable revenue, tiered rates, and the like. The general framework for this particular study, specific to this study, aside from the general steps that I just mentioned, was that we were looking for opportunities to improve the existing rate structure, but we also wanted to retain the same basic structure. So in other words, we weren't looking for changes for the sake of making changes, but we did want to look for opportunities to make it simpler, namely to allow your customers to have a better understanding of why they were paying the rates that they were paying, help them understand that, and also bring it in line with industry standard and any legal requirements that we thought could be better reflected in the rates. We also treated the potable water system as a separate enterprise from the recycled water system. This isn't really a change. That's how the district has been treating them, but just wanted to call that out, that we do treat those two different systems as separate enterprises. And finally, we wanted to ensure that all ratepayers were being treated equitably and that we are conforming with the cost of service requirements of Proposition 218. So this is a very relevant law that's been challenged a lot recently in the last 10 years. There's been a lot of changes in water rates in California because of Proposition 218. And so there's a requirement to understand recent case law and make sure that the rates that are being proposed are reflecting those evolving requirements. So first, to cover the Novato potable water financial plan, first we look at the reserves here, and without getting into too many details, the total unrestricted cash for the Novato enterprise is about $10.6 million as of July 1st, 2019, which is the beginning of the current fiscal year. There's some restricted revenue which comes from your capacity charges collected from developers. And then there's some receivables from the recycled water enterprise that we also keep track of. When we look at the revenue for the potable water system, the Novato enterprise, the vast majority of the revenue, so nearly 90%, comes from your rate revenue collected from your customers. Some of it is also collected through wholesale rates sold to other agencies. And then there's other miscellaneous revenue that comes through interest earnings and the like. The connection fees are revenues that come from your developers when new connections are made to the system. This is a particularly volatile source of revenue because it depends on how many houses are built or connections are sized up in a particular year. So we made some assumptions about the connection fee revenue for the course of the study. But those are the types of revenues that aren't going to be fully understood until that comes to pass. One thing that is interesting to note, as you look at the total rate revenue, it seems like a big number, $20 million. But when you compare it to the number of gallons that the utility provides to its customers, clean, reliable water service, it's 2.4 billion gallons of water that's provided to customers. And when you do the math, that comes out to less than a penny per gallon. And if you go into any grocery store and you buy a gallon of Arrowhead, it's going to cost well in excess of $1, maybe $2. So that's 100 to 200 times cheaper than the water that's purchased at a store. So it's a very relevant metric that is often overlooked by customers who feel like their bill is very expensive, but if they understood how much it was costing, I think that's an important thing for customers to understand. On the other side, the expenses, the largest portion of the pie here is your source of supply. So water is purchased from Sonoma County Water Agency, and that water comes via aqueduct. A portion of your water comes from there. Another portion is treated at the Stafford Lake. But the source supply is $6 million. Your water treatment at the lake is $2.5 million. And then the other big line item here is the transmission and distribution system, which is basically the infrastructure that brings all the water to your customers. So you see the total budget, including debt service, is $20.8 million. This does not include the capital spending, which we'll cover on the next slide here. This slide shows the capital spending for the district. It shows a few existing years or past years in fiscal 16, 17, and 18. It shows that a lot of those capital expenses were, sorry, I'm trying to turn my, there we go. A lot of those capital expenses were either debt financed or grant financed. Going forward, that you will notice a increase in what we call pay-go capital spending, which means that it's being cash financed as opposed to debt financed. And this is an initiative that the district has taken on. It's historically spent about $2.5 million per year in pay-go, and it's aiming to spend closer to $4 million per year in pay-go in order to address aging infrastructure. Pay-go, when you can do it, is generally a better way to pay for costs that are reoccurring costs, such as rehabilitation of the system, because when you don't issue debt, you're not paying the interest and whatnot. So the district is trying to position itself financially to be able to pay for more of its expenses with cash instead of paying for debt. Some of the notable projects for the next 5 years include a lot of pipeline rehabilitation, nearly $7 million. A lot of the system is aging. There's pipes out there that are over 70 years old, and generally pipes have a expected useful life. These days, new pipes that get put in the ground have an expected useful life of 80 to 100 years, perhaps, with the new materials. But back when these pipes were put in the ground, is much shorter. I'm not an engineer, but 50 to 60 years would be a typical expected useful life for pipes. So a lot of these have exceeded their expected useful life and need to be replaced. There's also a lot of, or not a significant amount, but there is a preventative maintenance program which is detecting leaks and managing your assets. And it's important to note that preventative maintenance saves ratepayers a lot of money by being able to detect ruptures before they happen. When a rupture in the pipes occurs, it's a very expensive emergency response that needs to happen, where the pipe needs to get dug up on the spot. You throw basically a Band-Aid on it and you bury it again until you can fix it with a longer term solution. So preventative maintenance, to get out there and make sure that you fix the pipes before they rupture, is a cost saving measure that's very important and that the district's taking very seriously. This building, the administrative building, it has also exceeded its expected useful life and needs to be replaced, and the district is interested in taking advantage of current very low interest rates in order to debt finance that expenditure. That also includes a replacement of the laboratory, which needs to be upgraded. There's also some storage tank and pump station rehabilitation that needs to take place. So I covered a bit of this already, but to sort of recap the capital spending, the biggest line item is this building, the $15 million expense for the administrative building. There are elements of the building that are not disability compliant that need to be addressed. The laboratory is dated and also needs to be updated. And we're taking advantage of low interest rates before they go up and make that a much more expensive endeavor. We talked about the repair and replacement and how the pipelines are sometimes, some of them are over 70 years old. And the third point that I did not talk about is that the district is spending money to upgrade some of its capacity in order to meet some fire flow requirements, particularly given the recent fire events. I think it's ratepayers are cognizant of the importance of making sure that the system's prepared to deal with fire events. Switching gears here a little bit, part of the financial plan involves looking at the reserves. I mentioned earlier that the Novato enterprise has about $10.6 million in cash reserves. The target for those reserves is expressed here. So there's various reserves built into that. There's an operating reserve, which is a reserve that's intended to anticipate or be prepared for significant changes in operating costs. This particular reserve targets based on an industry standard that you want to keep about 3 or 4 months of operating costs in the bank in the event that something significant happens. So that comes out to $5.6 million. There's an OPEB reserve, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, which is really a liability based on future employment benefits that that the district will have to pay. This $4.4 million is based on an actuarial evaluation of what that liability is. And then a separate evaluation by financial advisor found that the district has other liabilities that amount to about $2 million, and that it would be prudent to keep a contingency reserve in order to be prepared for those liabilities coming up. So these are what we are calling minimum reserves. So in other words, over the course of the financial planning period, we never want to go below the sum of these 3 reserves, which is $12 million. So we don't ever want to plan to go below that number. It may happen that something will come up and you'll drop below that $12 million. But in terms of the planning that we have for the next 5 years, we don't want to plan to go below the $12 million. On the other hand, there's a different type of reserve that we're calling the Maintenance Accrual Fund Reserve, which is really designed to address the fact that the capital spending, as we showed earlier in this slide, you can see the capital spending is very volatile. From one year to the next, it may be as low as $1.5 million to as high as $10 million. Now, that includes debt financing. If you look at the cash financing, you can still see that there's quite a bit of peaks and valleys. And so the purpose of that 4th reserve is to address the fact that some years you're going to be spending more and other years you'll be spending less. And so you can draw down on that reserve during the high years and build up on the reserve during the low years. And so the reserve target for that is $4 million for a total of $16 million in your reserves as a target. This slide has a lot going on, but it captures all of the concepts that I just discussed. In the top graph, this shows expenses and revenues. And in this particular scenario, we're showing what would happen if the district did not raise rates at all, if we kept the rate revenue status quo as it is currently. So what you see in the background is the green represents revenue. The dark green at the bottom is the other revenue, the non-rate revenue, which I described as interest earnings and capital facility charges, et cetera. The light green here is your rate revenue, and so you can see it stays flat over the course of the next 10 years. In front of that, in the columns, you see the expenses. So the dark purple here is your operating expenses. The red are transfers. The hash is debt. And the light blue at the top is your cash capital. So you can see that any year where the expenses are higher than the revenues is a deficit year where you're losing money. And the graph down below shows that you are currently at $10 million in your reserves. The target or the minimum reserves, as we described, is $12 million. The target reserves up to $14 million. And you can see the red line is what would happen. You would quickly plunge below zero by 2024, and you'd be significantly in the red after that. So this picture right here is a very clear picture of why no rate increases is not a tenable solution for the district. This next graph is the same graph, but it shows the proposed rate increases. So we show down here that we're proposing 6%, 6%, 6%, 5%, 5% over the next 5 years. It's not, the board has not yet decided whether it wants to, it is going to adopt a single year or 2 years or even 5 years. It's a decision that the board will make in the next meeting or maybe discuss during this meeting. But so this, we show 10 years of financial planning. We can recommend up to 5 years of adopting rates. but it could be as few as 1 year of rate increases. You can see up here that there are years where the revenues would exceed the expenses, and you would be building up your reserves to meet the target reserves by 2027. So as you can see, as I mentioned before, the reserves never drop below the minimum reserves over the course of the planning period and eventually get up to the target reserves by 2027. One concept that's up here that I should address since it's here is the debt coverage ratio. So this is a financial metric. It's a measurement of how easily the district can pay for its debt. It's a requirement of existing debt to meet a certain number. In your case, the minimum is 1.25 is the minimum coverage, and you would meet that requirement easily with these proposed rates. In the previous example with no rates, you would not meet that requirement, which is why it's highlighted in red, and that would put you in default of your existing debt obligations, which would hurt the district's credit rating in the future should that happen. And that would, a lower credit rating means that any attempts to borrow debt or borrow money in the future would be more expensive for the district. So one very important component of both the reserve policies that are being proposed and the debt coverage numbers that are being targeted is making sure that the district continues to maintain its credit rating, which is a very positive credit rating, so that it can continue to qualify for cheap debt, which ultimately is a benefit to your ratepayers. So the things that are driving these rate increases, these 6% rate increases followed by 5%, is that the operating costs have increased by over 6% over the past 4 years. A large part of that is being driven by the increase in the costs from SOQA, from Sonoma County Water Agency. Their water sales, the cost of purchasing water from them has increased between 5 and 6%. Going forward, your costs are going to continue to increase with inflation. We generally assume that most of your costs will escalate at a rate of 3%, which follows the general CPI or the Consumer Price Index. But your water purchases are known to will increase by 5 to 6%. And this is a forecast that's been provided by the county. So that's a large portion of why the rates need to increase by the 6% that we're proposing, is that a significant portion of your operating budget will be increasing by that much. There's also the increase in capital spending that was described, which is largely going to rehabilitation and reinvestment of the existing system. And if these changes are not made, then expenses will continue to rise above your revenues, your debt coverage ratio will fall below mandated levels, your reserve levels will fall, and your district will be unable to fund those rehabilitation projects, which will mean that you'll have an increase in the number of ruptures, and the quality of the water service to customers will be impacted. So that's the Novato water enterprise. I'll switch gears to the recycled water enterprise. A lot of these slides are similar, so I'll go through them a little bit faster pace because I think the concepts are familiar now. The unrestricted reserves here are $400,000, and larger restricted reserves. The revenue that comes into the recycled water enterprise the majority comes from the sale of recycled water. There's also a transfer that comes from Novato. This transfer is essentially system development fees, developer fees that are being collected and being used to pay for the recycled water infrastructure. The recycled water system was built as a new source of supply for the district because going out and purchasing new water rights would be potentially an even more expensive endeavor. So the district increased its portfolio of water supply by building this recycled water system. And so developers, as they join the system, the revenue collected from developers, which is intended to expand the system, is being used to pay for that expansion of the water portfolio. On the operating side, the vast majority of the expenses for the recycled water system is the debt service. Because this system was created very recently and it was created through the issuance of debt, most of the costs fall under debt service. There's also transfers out that need to be made to other agencies, member agencies that participate in the recycled water system, and other operating costs. The capital spending on the recycled water in the future will be minimal, really just sort of routine maintenance projects, about $100,000 per year. You can see that the vast majority of capital spending is in the past, and this was for building that system. A good portion of those costs were paid for through grants, and then the other portion was debt finance, which is why the debt service expense is currently so large. But going forward, new capital spending will be minimal. The reserves for the recycled water system, there's only two in this case. There's the operating reserve, the same idea. It's got 4 months, which is of operating costs, which is about $175,000 currently. And then the capital reserve fund, which again is designed to address volatility in capital spending and also provide emergency funds in the event of asset failure, and that amounts to $474,000. So here's the financial forecast for the recycled water enterprise. You can see that there's the forecasted fund balance is very, very straight here. And the rates are identical to the Novato system. So the reason that this is so straight is because the recycled water fund is calibrated to some degree to correspond to its costs, its revenue requirements, and there's a transfer that happens with the Novato water system, which is that transfer is calibrated in order to meet the recycled water needs to pay for using that the developer impact revenue to pay for the debt service. So switching gears to the cost of service and rate structure, just as a refresher, the existing rates for potable or for all your water, there's a water usage quantity charge. So this is basically the rate that's paid depending on how much water is used. Residential has 3 tiers. Tier 1, 2, and 3. Commercial has seasonal rates, so a summer rate and a winter rate. There's a uniform raw water rate for customers that just take raw water from the lake. There's the recycled water rate. There's an elevation surcharge for customers that live higher up on the hill because it's very expensive to pump water up a hill. It's very heavy and takes a lot of electricity and pump stations and infrastructure. There is a drought surcharge that the district adopted previously, which was not addressed as part of this study. And then on the other side of the bill, there's the fixed service charge. So the service charge is a fixed depending on the size of the meter that the account has. Other charges include a fire service charge for maintenance of fire service lines, of private fire service lines, and a couple of other fees that were not addressed as part of this study. So here we're going to talk about how the tiered rates and the seasonal rates, the difference between tiers 1, 2, and 3, and the summer rates and winter rates, how that was derived. So we start by explaining that the district has 2 sources of water. It's got the Sonoma County Water Agency water, which is about 75% of the water that is used in its portfolio. It varies a bit, as you can see in this graph, but generally speaking, it's about 75% of the portfolio. Then there's also the Stafford Lake, which the district extracts water from the lake, treats it, and then provides that to customers. The Sonoma County water comes from an aqueduct, and that water is already treated, so no additional treatment is required. The more expensive water of these two is the Stafford treatment. The reason for that is essentially comes down to the source of the water supply that the county has access to comes from a supply of water that doesn't require a lot of treatment, and then there's also just efficiencies of scale. That system is very large and it can provide a lot of water. The Stafford treatment plant is relatively small, particularly compared to the county system, and the water needs to be treated to a certain level. So the relative cost between treating water at the lake versus purchasing the water from the county is about 21% more expensive treating the water. What we're going to demonstrate here is that the tier prices for the tiers 1, 2, and 3 are based on this cost differential between the different sources of supply, and that the amount of water received in tiers 1, 2, and 3 is based on the amount of water that's available from these sources. So what we see here is that this is generally explaining what I just conveyed, which is that in Tier 1, for the residential rates, Tier 1, the amount that's going to be paid for Tier 1 water is going to be based on the cost of Sonoma County Water Agency water, and that the amount of water sold in Tier 1 is based on the amount of water that's purchased from the county. Conversely, for Tiers 2 and 3, the cost of Tier 2 is based on the cost of treating water at the lake, and the amount of water sold in Tiers 2 and 3 is based on the amount of water that is treated and sold from the lake. The difference between 2 and 3 is that they're both based on the cost of Stafford Lake. However, Tier 3 is based on, includes some conservation costs. So this is used to fund the district's conservation program, and it's being charged to Tier 3 based on the fact that it's customers in Tier 3 that are really driving the need for that conservation program. The elevation zone charge, the rates that are being proposed are very similar to the rates that are currently charged. We simply updated these numbers based on new operating costs and new data that we have for the cost to pump water. But ultimately, there's not really a significant change that's being, structurally there is not a change being proposed, and the amount that's being charged is just a bit more. It's about $2 million is the additional cost needed for pumping water. The proposed equivalency schedule, so this concept is, so on the fixed meter charge, as I mentioned before, the fixed portion, you pay more depending on the size of your meter. And the industry standard for determining how much more you pay for a larger meter is based on the flow rating for these different meters. So if you look at these different size meters, they're rated for being able to pass a certain amount of water through them as measured in gallons per minute. That rating can be turned into a ratio between the different sizes, and that ultimately, that ratio is what determines how much more you'll pay for a 1-inch meter as compared to a 5/8 inch meter. The existing equivalency schedule, or the ratio that is using for current rates, is based on this concept, but it's also based on a different concept that we looked at more closely and determined that we were more comfortable using this equivalency schedule, which is published by AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association. You will see that the numbers are significantly different for the larger meters. The proposed schedule goes from 1 for the smallest meter to 65 for the largest meter, and the existing starts at 1 and goes to 37. So the impact of this change is that the larger meter customers will be paying significantly more on their meter charge than they have previously. And we did spend quite a bit of time looking at this and making sure that we were comfortable with these recommendations, and this is in line with industry standards. This particular graph shows that we're not proposing a significant change in how much revenue we're collecting through the fixed revenue versus the variable revenue. Currently, the district recovers about 24% of its revenue through that fixed charge, and we're proposing an increase to 27%. So it's a slight increase, which is what the industry trends are showing, that that utilities are generally recovering more and more of its revenue from fixed revenue in order to better reflect the cost of providing service. This slide is a little bit different than the version that we showed last time. Previously, I only showed the pie charts at the bottom, and I realized that was a little confusing. So what I did is I included these top pie charts. So what this is showing is how much water is being sold in each tier. So in the current tiers, so this shows the tier allocation that is the current tier allocation and the proposed tier allocation. So right now, tier 1 is up to 615 gallons per day. Tier 2 is 615 to 1,845, and then tier 3 is everything above that. The proposed tiers are significantly lower. So tier 1 only goes to 262 gallons. Tier 2 then goes up to 720, and then tier 3 is everything above that. A comment was made during the previous meeting. One of the comments that was made was that these tiers, the current tiers, were based on the customer behavior and the peak usage. I'm sorry, can you remind me? Average day peak month was the basis for this 615. So it was really looking at customer behavior and determining a tier allocation based on how customers behave. And what's being proposed is a completely different concept from that. What we're proposing is that the tier allocation should not be based on how customers behave. It should be based on your water supply, because there needs to be a cost basis for why you charge what you charge. And there's really no correlation between your costs and the way that customers behave. It's more about how much water do you have available at tier 1 costs. And so this 262 gallons per day results in about 74% of your water being sold in tier 1. And again, remember, I mentioned earlier that 74% of your water comes from Sonoma County Water Aquifer Agency. So that's the purpose of this number, is really in order to make sure that you're selling as much water in tier 1 as you're purchasing from your cheapest source of supply. And that's where you see the 74. Currently, you sell 93% of your water in tier 1. You sell 7% of your water in tier 2, and you sell less than 0.5% of your water in tier 3, which really makes tier 3 nearly meaningless in terms of the number of customers that are affected by it, and whether it's even a relevant tier that affects your customers. In terms of revenue, what you see is that each one of these tier 2 and tier 3 are expanded because the rates that are paid at those levels are pretty high. So you do collect 0.8% of your revenue from tier 3. amount of revenue that we're proposing, that with the proposed rates would be 5% of your revenue would be collected through Tier 3, about 29% of your revenue for Tier 2, and 66% of your revenue through Tier 1. So again, to back up, the current rate, the current tier allocations were based on the concept that we want the tiers to be a reflection of how much water customers need or how much they currently use, whereas the proposed method is more in line with Propositions 218's requirement that your rates have a cost basis and that they're aligned with the cost of your water supply. So I apologize, this slide has a lot of numbers on it, but this is a good slide for you to take home and look at. It's a good reference slide. Again, it shows the tier allocations here on the left. We're reminded that the summer rates are July, August, and September. The current summer rates are currently June, July, August, September, and October, so significantly more months. The reason that we picked these 3 months is because it's the middle of summer and the highest water use, but also this results in 74% of your water being sold during the winter at winter rates. And again, that 74% being the cheaper water. The winter rates are the cheaper rates, and so we want to make sure that we reflect the amount of water sold in the winter rates as being a reflection of your Sonoma County Water Agency water supply. So you can see the various percent changes that happen to the different Zone A, B, and C, which is the elevation charges, the summer and winter, Tier 1, 2, and 3. I won't go through all of these numbers individually, but what we will do is look at some of the bill impacts. So if we look at specific examples of different types of customers and how they'll be affected. So here we look at single family. 56% of all accounts have the smallest size meter, so the 5/8 inch meter. If we look at a median customer, so a customer that uses about 14,000 gallons every 2 months, their bill will increase by 7.7%. Now you'll see that everybody has a different impact to their rates. Some are above the 6% rate revenue increase that's being proposed, and some are below. The reason that's happening is because of all the structural changes that have just been described. There's changes in the allocation of how much water you get in tiers 1, 2, and 3. The meter charge equivalency schedules change, and so all those things have a pretty complex impact on different customers. And so you can see how it affects different customers in different ways depending on how large their meter is and how much water they use. You can see multifamily customers generally are going to see below average increases to their rates. And we'll also take a look at commercial. Sorry, there was where was the change?
It was on the slide.
It was
on
the high use, these numbers. I just want to point out that on the high use percentages here and here, in the previous presentation, the numbers were incorrect. There was a break in the formula, so these numbers that are in this updated presentation are the correct percentages.
How did that come to your attention?
Julie came across it.
We were confirming the online rate calculator to what the rate structure was, and so between Paul and I were able to kind of test it out and then discover that.
And to be clear, those numbers didn't have any downstream effects on any of the other rates or any of the analysis that didn't change any. It was just this particular table was incorrect, but it didn't affect anything else. For the commercial customers, you can see that there's different impacts during the summer months versus the winter months, as you could expect. Summer months are going to see higher than average increases, and a lot of the winter months are going to see lower than average. And remember, there's now 9 winter months as opposed to 6 winter months currently. So these lower increases are going to happen more frequently than these higher increases. The weighted impact, so if you look at the year in its totality, you can see the percent change of the annual bill to these different types of customers. So we looked at different meter sizes and what average water use for these different types of meters. Commercial customers are very heterogeneous in terms of there's some small meters with very small usage, there's or small meters with very large usage, there's some large meters with, so the behavior of these types of customers is a lot harder to come up with a typical customer than it is for residential, which there's more of those customers and they tend to behave very similar to each other. Here's a survey that Drew mentioned earlier. This is 16 agencies that the district has historically looked at, compared itself to over the years. And you can see that the current rates for North Marin puts you right in the middle of the pack, and that the proposed rates, this is for year 1 after the 6% rate increase, would keep you ranked in the same spot, right in the middle of the pack. We did not do this survey for years 3, 4, 5, 6 because we don't know what everybody else's rates are going to be in years 3, 4, 5, and 6. So, or sorry, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's also changes to the fire connection charges. This is a charge for private fire service to some commercial customers, and the district has to maintain their service line, and so there's a specific, it's about $155,000 in annual maintenance costs which need to be passed on to these customers, so we updated these numbers. And that's the end of my presentation. We have some future dates up here, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Mark, on the bill impact, a new graphic will be put on to the webpage.
It's already on there.
It's already on there.
Yeah, it was incorporated into your agenda packet and on the
Right.
website. We found it when we were testing out the online bill calculator, so it's
Okay.
been up for, as soon as we discovered it, it was corrected and we updated it. And it
Thank you.
actually was, the percentage increases were higher for those customers, so it's in line where it should be, which is showing modest increases, so.
The other question I had, Mark, was looking at the 6% proposed. I looked at my rate, I looked at my individual account and studied that on the rate calculator. And with your bill impact residential aspect particularly, some people are going to have, like me, more than 6% increase. Now, is that premised on the 666, or how many percentage rate increases do you have in there, and does it come back down where the first year is the biggest impact, and then it gets less for people going forward?
So the numbers that you see in the bill calculator are just for year 1, so it's just the 6% overall increase, and as you point out, it won't be 6% for most customers, it will be something other than that. Going forward in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, everyone will have exactly the same percent change. So the fact that there are some customers that go up and down and are above 6%, below 6%, that's something that only happens in year 1 because of all the structural changes. But once those structural changes have been made in year 1, year 2 is simply a 6% across the board increase to everybody's rates, and so it should be a very, very uniform going forward.
Right. I had one other question, and that is because Prop 218, the California Constitution, is requiring us to change our cost basis based on water supply percentage and not customer behavior, right?
Correct.
Okay. Do we have some customers that are going to be unduly impacted compared to their historical use that we've contacted, or maybe can discuss with them the impact initially?
Well, again, as Mark had indicated, everybody's individual account, the impact is, the best way to do that is look at the water cost calculator. There's so many changes.
Right.
It's hard to make general statements across the board. We have communicated with Nevada Unified School District, and actually Julie looked at all of their accounts, and it looks like it's about an 8% increase in the first year.
Okay.
City of Novato it looks like it's a little bit over 9%. I do want to mention, however, that over the last 3 to 5 years, we've converted a lot of both the Nevada Unified and the city accounts from potable water to recycled water at no cost to them, and that ended up being about an 8% decrease in cost. So if you look at it over a 5-year window, the increases that they're looking at right now here are tempered a little bit. Through that
Thank you.
analysis.
Thank you.
I think it's page 113, it's that actually that way. What's the logic again on the tier allocation from the current, say 0 to 615, that the proposed 0 to 262? What's the logic of shrinking those numbers, bringing them in?
So you don't want to try to understand why we're going from 615 to 262, because it's two completely different ways of thinking about it. So the 615 was based on one school of thought, which has merit in itself, and it was a very common way of setting rates in the past, and it continues to be in some cases where, absent any other logic, let's set the tiers based on customer behavior. So lots of utilities set their rates on what's the indoor water needs of our customers. We're going to say it's 55 gallons per capita per day, and so you come up with this allocation for tier 1 based on here are indoor water needs, and then you look at outdoor water needs for tier 2, et cetera. So that's a prevalent industry practice, but it's also done in the absence of really a cost-based way of doing it, because that's looking at need, and that doesn't affect the district and the cost to provide service to those customers. The paradigm that's being proposed is that the 262 gallons is actually, we backed into that number by saying, okay, if we set the tier 1 at 262 gallons per day for customers, that's going to result in us selling 74% of our water in tier 1, which is how much of our water we purchase from SCWA. So if I change that to 300 gallons per day, then you'd be selling 80% of your water in tier 1. Or if I moved it down to 200, you'd be selling much less. So it is basically calculated in order to result in a certain amount of water being sold in tier 1, so that you could say, here's the cost for tier 1 because this is how much it costs to purchase water from the county, and here's your allocation because we want to sell as much water as we're purchasing from them in this tier 1. Does that make sense? Sort of.
Mark, can you also just go over again how the tier rates change themselves?
Right, so the tier rates themselves change. I'll go to this slide again. So the
dollar amounts. Go the percentage, like the tier 1. The tier 1 rate now is going up 1%. So if you stay within that tier 1 rate from 0 to 262 gallons, that increase in that tier is 1%, not 6% or any other number. It's 1%. So can you just go over
Sure.
the
Yeah.
different
Yeah. So when we're looking at residential, and we'll just focus on Zone A, the current rate for Tier 1 is $5.42. We're proposing $5.50. Now again, this $5.50 is based on the cost of purchasing SCWA water. That's what this unit cost represents. We're essentially saying, what does it cost to purchase SCWA water? How much of that water are we selling in Tier 1? And we divide one by the other, and it gives us a unit cost for how much we how much we can charge for Tier 1. The result is that this is only a 1% increase for Tier 1 water, so it's essentially not changing. We're charging customers basically exactly the same amount for Tier 1. So the vast majority of your customers, most of which stay in Tier 1, will continue to stay in Tier 1, will really not see any change to their Tier 1 rate in year 1. Okay. Tier 2, it's significantly lower. We're proposing $6.23, and the current rate is $8.64. So it's actually a 28% decrease in Tier 2 and a almost 50% decrease in Tier 3. The reason we can do this, or the reason that it works out this way, is because we're selling less water in Tier 1, right? So customers are moving into Tier 2 faster because they don't get 615 gallons, they get 262 gallons. So you get less water, but it's cheaper in Tier 2. And it's really important to underline or to emphasize the fact that this isn't being done by policy. We're not trying to achieve a specific outcome of customer behavior, or we want to force people into Tier 2 faster. It's not to try to encourage conservation or because we made a determination of what's the right amount based on philosophy. It's really that we want to sell a certain water supply at Tier 1 rates. And that water supply here for Tier 1 is the SCWA water. And in Tier 2 and 3, we want to sell your Stafford water, which is more expensive.
So when I did my rate calculator, it matched the 24% variable going to 27% on for fixed, rather. Fixed going from 20. Now that's regressive, okay?
Sure.
Right. So do we have any provisions? I think we were talking about putting in effect now, since we're doing 218, to where for people that are really on fixed incomes that are deeply challenged, some people, very few, I hope, where there is some available funds to help them a bit.
Yeah, I'm working on a low-income assistance rate program that's going to come to the board next board meeting. So you'll see that it's going to be put into place at the same time the rates will be, once you
Right.
approve it, it will be effective July 1st when the rate increases go into effect. It'll just be a flat rate, so it'll help with that fixed component of the rate charge.
Okay, thank you.
So you'll see more next week on that.
I glossed over it on slide 8 here, but you can see that the district has set aside $86,000 for that affordability program, which is currently under development.
So it was incorporated into the rate study.
Good.
Good.
You were talking about the school district a few minutes ago, and it's been my recollection that over the years, they've kind of struggled. They've got so many things, academic things for teachers, students, and so forth, that they haven't always been able to really adequately keep track of their water use, landscaping primarily. And there's pressures, I guess, probably from soccer people and many others to keep the fields green. Which is good for business for us, but not as good for them, for their budgets. I think you said something about them changing some of the meters or some other things to maybe help them. do you see other things, that either evident things or that maybe they hire somebody to come in and look at their whole irrigation system and come up with some further changes?
That's always possible, just to look at their efficiency of use. I mean, the other thing that we've acknowledged is they could look at their individual accounts, and if some of the meters are actually larger than they need to be, that the meters could be downsized, and that would have that would benefit them in terms of the cost. So,
Yeah.
so that could be done on a case-by-case basis.
But you kind of want them to take the initiative. I'm not trying to run the business, but just based on past experience and a large amount of hearsay that it just hasn't been a priority for the school district. And not just Novato, probably all the school districts, the same thing. But
I think the good news is a lot of their larger accounts, like Olive School, down in Hamilton School, that, you know, we've converted those, the charter school, we've converted those to recycled water. And again, once those conversions were done, and again, that was at no cost to them, their water costs went down about
Yeah, that's
7-8%.
good. Yeah, that's good. What about IBC, the College of Bryan? They've undergone a number of changes, and I believe some of you may know, I guess they're still doing a lot of major changes with their plans to for new buildings, removing, replacing, upgrading. They don't have a whole lot of landscaping out there, I think. But do you have any sense that they're trying to take these sort of things into account to better monitor their water usage?
No, I mean, as you well know, they're going through major renovations and expansion there. And so when all those buildings are remodeled, and just the plumbing efficiencies should make a big difference in the amount of water that they're using compared to the old plumbing fixtures.
Am I correct? They really, I've gone out there occasionally, not frequently. They don't have a lot of landscaping.
Correct.
It's mostly volunteer kind of stuff. And
Recall that the city of, the school district and College of Marin participated in the study of of the costs, whether it's feasible to extend recycled water up to the campus, and the demands are just not that great. And so the study really showed that it wasn't cost effective at this time.
yes, I seem to recall
to
that.
extend recycled water.
Yeah,
Because the
there's very little landscaping up there, and there's no changes. There might be a little bit more. They've got some workforce housing planned up there, and when that happens, there'll be a little more water usage, but I doubt if it follows the theme that they've had there in the past, it'll just be, inside of the natural vegetation. So I don't see a lot happening.
And the school district only has the one school, I forget the name of it, up there at the Ignacio Boulevard and Sunset, is it?
Yeah, so-
Linwood,
Linwood, yeah, and,
and that's on recycled water as well.
oh, okay,
So
that's good.
recycled is a third component of our supply, right?
Correct.
Okay, and what does it run at basically on an annualized basis? And then what does it run at as a percentage of total supply in the summer period, which we're decreasing from 5 to 3 months?
Well, to answer your question, as far as annual, right now it's about 7% of our supply. If you look at peak summer demands,
Right.
it's at least 12, if not more. And as I've reported before, it's equal to and starting to exceed 1/3 the capacity of our Stafford treatment plant during the summer months. So, as you can imagine, most of our recycled water is for large outside landscape irrigation. So most of that use is during the summer months. However, we have been really successful in now getting some customers in car washes. We have 3 car washes here in Novato. So those are year-round customers. But for the most part, the bulk of the recycled water demand is in that summer, and really helps significantly de-peak
Sure.
the demands that we need from not only Stafford but also Sonoma County Water Agency.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we're treating the Novato Potable Enterprise and the Recycle as separate entities, which we've done historically. But Stafford Lake is 21% more expensive water than SCWA. What is recycled as a cost structure compared to those? Roughly.
I don't, Julie, you remember the cost offhand? You
No,
know,
I
it
don't.
depends on the year-to-year production. And Mark, I don't know if you happen to have that.
Yeah, I mean, it comes out in the rates that are shown here. So you can see that the recycle water rates are $6.24 per. It's $6.24. It's a uniform rate, and so you can see how that compares to the different tiered rates here for Zone A. And then the recycled water meter charges are slightly more expensive. So it's a slightly more expensive source of water in general. However, these customers use a tremendous amount of water, right? So if they were normal customers, they'd be up in tier 3 right away, and they'd be using all their water during the summer, right? So they'd be, actually the better comparison is if you look at the summer rates for here, so the 767 is the better comparison. So it's a little bit less expensive, but so these customers would be paying, are saving a lot of money by being recycled water customers. And
They'd be in tier 3.
because they'd be paying primarily summer rates, right? Because that's when they use their water. So they are saving money by being recycled water customers. Absolutely.
Right. But we're also bringing on an additional supply, and they're massively volume based, right? So it's a benefit to us as well in that. Right. So it's a mutuality of benefits.
Absolutely. And there's, the recycled water program as a whole provides a lot of benefits to the potable water system.
Right.
Because the more customers you can put on recycled water, the less water you're using at Sonoma County Water Agency and at Stafford. And, it's delaying the time when you're going to have to go to yet another source of supply once your capacity to purchase water from the aqueduct and to treat it at the lake reaches its limit. You would have to go to your next source of supply, which could be significantly more expensive. So that recycled water program is part of a larger portfolio, and so there's a lot of benefits that get conferred to the potable water system by having that recycled water system.
Well, that's what I meant by mutuality of benefits.
Yes, exactly.
That's what it means.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that.
At some point, we're going to have to decide how long the period of time we're going to use in looking into this, and how comfortable are we with the financial forecast with this? Because we're starting out with 6, ending up with 2% way down the other end. I don't see us going out that far because things do change. But at what point do you think we could have some confidence in the numbers?
Right. So the standard period of time is between 1 and 5 years. I never go beyond 5 years because, in particular, the capital spending. Inflation. Who knows what's going to happen? But I'm more confident in inflation than I am in the capital spending program because a lot can change in terms of the infrastructure needs and whatnot. What gets built, what doesn't get built, what falls apart. I would never propose rates beyond a 5-year window. Generally, 5 years is the most typical period of time that is implemented, but some agencies do it 1 year at a time. So it really depends on the agency's comfort with taking on longer-term projections and also the desire to go through the 218 noticing process, which you'd only have to do once if you adopt it for 5 years. You do it more frequently if you adopt it for a shorter amount of time.
So I have some thoughts on this. Just to remind the board that a week from tonight, we'll be having this back as an action item to accept the report and then to give direction to staff. And that's really, that's the time where the determination should be made about are we doing a 1 year or multiple year rate increase. And I just want to remind the board that we historically, at this time of the year, bring to the board a 5-year financial plan. And we show what we're projecting for rate increases over the next 5 years. And the board directs staff to move forward with the first year. And that's been our standard practice, and we do our notification to our customers. And for me personally, I see, even though we accept this study that's a 5-year rate study, it's very similar to our previous internally prepared 5-year financial plans. And I don't see any reason to deviate from our historical practice where we still do this on a year-to-year basis. I personally think it's good for communication to our customers. It's a standard practice that we've done year in and year out, but at the end, the board will make that decision. But I just wanted to give you my perspective.
And thank you for that. Sonoma County Water, which is our largest line item on expense, what are their projections for our wholesale costs?
5.5%.
No, 7.
The actual budget came out, and we've been, that's, and I believe it's at 6.79%. You're talking about the Sonoma County Water Agency
Right. What are they
increases?
what are they gonna be charging us?
I believe it's 6.79, but I can double check.
And
So
is
it's
that
more than 6.
so it's between 6, closer to 7%, and that's per year, and that's how long are they proposing that?
That's just this
Think we-
next year.
Just the next
year.
So
One
one year.
their projections in the past have been between 4 and 6%.
Right.
This year it came out higher than 7% when we first started reviewing the budget.
Right.
We went through the review process. We're now down below 7. And next year they'll come out with their projections. So they haven't projected out further with any specifics. So we'll go through this process again next year.
Mark is looking kind of stunned.
Well, we hadn't talked about that, but it's,
I did bring it up to Mark at some point, like this variable could be higher than the 6%
Sure.
built into this.
yeah.
We talked about that being.
Yeah, no, it's certainly something that we don't have a crystal ball for, and I didn't expect our projections to be perfect. And the numbers that we're currently using was from, we used 6, and that was from the agency itself. That was their previous estimate, and so they came out a little higher. But it's within the range of what you would expect. We're not going to get every projected number exact. Some will be high, some will be low.
Right.
So I don't think it's going to affect our results at all or our recommendations.
So the reason, Mark, I find your report excellent, having read it quite a bit. But one question I have is the building, we're going to rehab a building that's 55 years old, right? We're just going to rehab it and not tear it and build our own new building. And interest rates have been coming down even more, and you'll be doing something on financing over the next few weeks, right, Jim?
Yes.
All right. So of your 6% proposed rate increase, what's the sensitivity for the building of that? Is it 1%? Is it 2% of that? Because the building is going to be 15 to 18 million over the 7-year period.
Right.
So what percentage of rate increase is for the building?
So we have some of those numbers. I guess it's not in this.
I think it was
The-
a 1%.
It was 1%, but was it 1% for 5 years?
That's what I
That's what I remember as well. So the increase that we calculate, we asked ourselves this question last month, is that it represents about 1% five times. So the rates are 6% instead of 5%.
Right, so your proposal over the next 5 years is 3 6% rate increases
Right.
and 2 5% increases, right? That's what your consultancy is proposing to the board.
Right.
Of those 6 and 5s, 1% will be for the building.
Exactly. So if the building were not to be built, it would be 55544.
Right, but it's a 55-year-old building, and we depreciate capital assets over how many years, 40?
Depends on the type of asset.
And how about this capital
I
asset?
don't know.
It's 40 to 50 years.
Right, 40 to 50. So we've already depreciated the building.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, okay, so it's lived beyond its useful depreciable life.
Yes.
And it's a workplace safety and productivity reason for doing this. Make it workplace safe for customers and our staff, and also increases productivity by having better lighting and stuff like that, right? So, it's a-
Doubles the size of our lab,
That's
too,
right.
which is sorely needed.
right, right. So it's
It
it's clear
includes-
payback.
It includes standby power for loss of power, which we're experiencing more frequently, allows us to continue to operate with the generator.
Right.
As he was saying before, brings us up into compliance with ADA for not only our customers, but also, any staff members that we might have working here. So yeah, there's a multitude of reasons. And as you say, it's a renovation of the building, it's not a tear down.
Right, exactly. That's great. Does
that
anyone have any
factor-
questions?
Yeah, does that factor in the all the phases of the building? Is that included?
This here in the first 5 years factors in phases 1 and 2.
Okay, so 3 is our
Is a future,
fallback, right? I mean, we could build the rest of it without having to scrimp on the building. We could build it without a roof. One other question, how do we factor in and relate to the West Marin fees with this? I mean, this basically gives us the guidance in doing that, but, the costs are all different out there, and that's really not in this whole study, correct?
It is not, and so currently we're working with Mark on a scope of doing a West Marin rate study.
Okay, it'll
It'll
be,
be separate because it has its own, all of its own variables and there's.
right, no, that's,
we
that.
track it separately, and we just kept this out just to kind of get the bulk of our system evaluated, and we'll be looking at that in the next fiscal year.
Will we be delaying okay, what do we do for a rate increase
So
after this year?
we'll have the same process that we've done in prior years, is I'll put together a 5-year financial forecast.
right.
We'll build in a rate increase based on that analysis, and then we'll do the Prop 218, increase the rates as we normally do on July 1st, and then go through the rate study process in the fiscal year. So this time next year, we'll probably be doing the West Marin system.
We had an audience question?
Yeah, as a layperson, and you did a great job explaining everything, but it's a lot for me. Could you please explain to me what you mean by the availability of water? Because as a person sitting here who is one single person, and I have family, I can't understand the change in your thinking as far as was the cost basis a mandated thing that you have to do?
So
So what constitutes availability of water?
the availability of water is really based on this graph here. So this shows 5 years of the district's use of water. So the blue line on top there is the amount of water in acre feet it purchased from SCWA, and the yellow line shows how much water was treated at Stafford. And so it shows that the average is about 75% of its water comes from SCWA and about 25% comes from the lake. So there's nothing binding about these numbers. As you can see, one goes up and the other goes down, and it moves around a bit. But the bottom line is this is where the district is getting its water, and this is the reality of the district's costs. You know, the district currently purchases about 75% of his water from the county. So that's the legal requirement.
From Sonoma County.
Sorry.
Not the county, most of us think of Marin County.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. From Sonoma County. The legal requirement is that the district must charge its customers for water service based on the cost of providing that water service. You can't charge one rate that has nothing to do with the cost of providing the service. So this is the service that's currently being provided. It's at these levels of water supply, and so we are reflecting those costs in the rates.
So it is a mandated cost basis
Yeah. So
that you're changing your thinking on a need of an individual family. That's what I'm having a problem with. That's a big, to me, that's a big difference as a
Right.
layperson.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Have you gone on the water calculator for your account?
I haven't been, please, I'm not computer literate. That's why I have a pen and pencil.
Right.
But I have done some, looking into interesting going to the meetings, because it's the vocabulary that gets you tied up in.
Sure.
And when you're talking about availability, I'm thinking in terms of amount of water available. That is not what you meant. Do you understand why I got confused?
Sure. So when you talk about availability, are you talking about the water available to the district or the water available to the individual customer?
I'm going to have to say probably to the district.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll defer to Drew on how much is available in terms of Sonoma County Water Agency. Could you purchase 100% of your water from them if you wanted to?
Yeah, we could.
Right, so the availability of different sources of water is not limited, but there's a reality of how the district is behaving and what their costs are. And you can see those water sources as, and the decisions of where the district gets its water has a lot to do with managing its water portfolio and managing the future of how the district's going to grow into the future and be able to provide long-term and reliable service to its customers.
So it will be being based on your district as opposed to the individual person.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the district is, the cost to provide service for the district is really, it's, the overall cost to the district. The needs of individual customers, while very important to the district, and it's very cognizant of what those needs are, and it does everything it can to provide, affordable service to individuals, those individual needs don't drive the district's costs. And so the district has its hands tied with respect to the legal requirements at the state level that it must simply basically pass on its cost to its customers, and it can't fiddle with the rates in ways that would change their rates so that they didn't reflect the cost to provide service.
But it's a great question, and it's at the very heart of what we're doing. Because Carl, our lawyer, will tell you why we now have to obey Proposition 218, which is the whole reason for the structure and the rate water study. Right, Carl?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I could give you a 25-minute talk about it, but the short version is one of the things that the state of California decided was important to do is to try to encourage conservation by having tiered water rates that go up and in effect penalize the higher water users to try to encourage them to use less. A decision came out down in Orange County, city of San Juan Capistrano, that said you can do that, but you have to make sure that each tier is bearing only the costs that are associated with service to that tier. So the tier 1 would have to pay tier 1's worth of service. And that's why the 74% and the 26% is so elegant, because 74% of the supply comes from Sonoma County on average, and so you precisely link that number to the first tier. And so that's elegant in its simplicity, if I will. But so that was a big change, because the state was trying to say, for example, you want to have your commodity rates going up and penalizing people, and this court said, no, you can't do that. You can do that only if you can establish a cost basis.
Okay.
And the strongest way to link the cost is when you have different sources of supply and track those costs and allocate them based upon usage.
Well, I
So
still think-
that's it in a nutshell.
I still think there's gonna be a problem with the lay public understanding the fact that going from me being a one person to my children who have 4 or 5 children is gonna be a very difficult thing to realize and to factor into it, and that's why I asked for the clarification, because I wasn't understanding it.
Yeah, absolutely. These are all very good
I
questions.
just moved here, so I'm not used to your, listening to this type of water conservation and water thing.
And
It's very interesting.
And we would be happy if you came in during normal business hours. We'd be happy to work with your actual account and show you what impact it has on your account.
Well, like I said, I just am new to it, so I just started, and coming to the meeting was helpful to me to understand my water bill. Just how things were working, and that's why, essentially why I came. I was interested in hearing it, and I have enjoyed listening. Even though I got lost sometimes, I have enjoyed it.
It's very easy to get lost with all of this. Thank you for coming both times. Does the board or the public or the staff have any further questions on this agenda item? Okay, so just to give timeline, this is the second public workshop we've had. February 11th, February 25th. Will wrote a great article in the IJ on the 17th of February, which gave wide coverage. And on our webpage, staff has done, I think the board would agree, a superlative job in outreach and communication. So if you go to our webpage, you'll see there's frequently asked questions, which are great. Okay, there's a rate cost calculator, which Julie has put on there. There's the full 71-page water rate study draft report, which is Mark's report, okay? And we will have another meeting next Tuesday, the 3rd, where the board will consider acceptance of Mark's report, and then, as Drew said, deciding what kind of annual rate increases, etc., the board chooses to consider. And then finally, on the 16th of June, the board will make a final decision on what the rate increase will be and for how long, right? And that will be after all the feedback we'd like to have. That's the board's mandate, is to be transparent with the integrity of our presentation. That's what we're doing, and that's what we want to do. So if there's nothing further, no questions or anything?
Just one clarification. You mentioned how long for the June meeting. A indication of how long will also need to be given on your next meeting on March 3rd.
March 3rd, I mentioned that.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
So are we all set? Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and close the meeting.